So good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this joint Acceler PointBeyond webinar. My name is Ian Woodgate, and I just want to make you aware that we will be recording this session, and we will be making both the slides and the recording available after this session. Also, do feel free to ask questions on the GoToWebinar questions widget, which is on the right-hand side, or alternatively, please feel free to email both either Christian or myself afterwards, should you have any questions. I'm very pleased to welcome Christian Buckley, MVP from Acceler, who's going to be presenting on this webinar today, and I'd like to make a start now by handing over to Christian.
Thanks a lot, Ian. It's great to be tackling this topic with you again. I know it's something that is at the top of a lot of folks' minds as SharePoint 2013 is kind of in full swing, and whether or not people are moving to 2013 today, I mean, most of what we're going to cover, I think you'd agree, Ian, is relevant whether you're moving to 2010 or 2013 or even over to Office 365. These are really kind of keys to migration success overall.
Absolutely, definitely. It's all the detail and the planning.
Well, what we're going to cover, so I'm going to go through a bunch of content here, and Ian will be jumping in and sharing some of his experiences working with customers on some of these topics. So it'll be a bit interactive, and hopefully people can't see that the little pop-ups as tweets come through, but
I think we
can you? Oh,
yeah.
Nice. Okay.
Sorry, it's just more interactive.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, now we just alerted some people that will have some fun and will probably try and trip me up by sending me tweets. Great. So we're going to talk about what's happening with SharePoint and the changes happening in your organization. I'm going to cover some of the advances in SharePoint 2013. It's not by any means supposed to be a feature by feature everything that comes with the 2013 platform. But it's just kind of a quick overview to give you some perspective on the types of changes that are in the latest release. It is a very different release. There are some great improvements there. And again, going back to those folks that are just now moving or have recently moved to 2010 and are starting that planning process to 2013 or to Office 365, I always like to preface that by saying that if you are getting business value out of the current platform or the older version, you do not have to automatically move to the latest version of SharePoint and to SharePoint 2013. Do it for the right reasons, for the business reasons, not necessarily just the technology reasons. So just like to say that up front. Then I'll go through and talk about some of the best practices for SharePoint migrations, and we'll talk about and Ian will share some of his real-world migration scenarios that PointBeyond has experienced with some of their customer base. So the goal today is talking about planning strategy for migration. So these are the things that typically if you look at people's experiences with migrations, where there are failures, where there are headaches and problems caused later down the road, was the lack of planning. It was this idea that, hey, we'll go and we'll just move the content databases. We've got a couple solutions, but it'll be fairly straightforward. And I have to tell you that after a couple years of working at Microsoft, I joined Microsoft and worked there for 3.5 years. I started in a group called Microsoft Managed Services, which became BPOS, or the Business Productivity Online Services, which is now part of Office 365. It was the team that was chartered with creating a hosted version of SharePoint. Well, when I joined the company, they were just beginning the rollout of the 2007 platform. And so I got involved with some of the early migrations. And so I saw most of the mistakes being made internally there at Microsoft. And so we'll hopefully guide you away from some of those mistakes. A little bit about me. So I've been a Microsoft SharePoint MVP for the last 2 years. I've been with Acceler for 3.5 years now, As I mentioned, prior to that, I was with Microsoft for 3.5 years. I also co-founded a couple companies and nonprofits, but I sold a company back in 2001 to Rational Software that was in the collaboration knowledge management space, but also went to another startup called E2Open, where I helped develop a SharePoint-like platform called Collaboration Manager that helped provide this kind of real-time or ad hoc collaboration scenario to supply chain organizations. So I've been working with knowledge management and collaboration technologies since the mid to late 90s. I'm also a co-author of a book, Microsoft SharePoint 2010, Creating and Implementing Real-World Projects. And for those that aren't very familiar with Exceller, Exceller's been around since 1994, originally the Lotus Notes space. We took that expertise in administration and governance and brought it over to the SharePoint space in 2007, where we've quickly become one of the leading ISVs in the SharePoint space. I'm doing a lot still to build the brand around that, but we do governance, administration, and also migration software. We're based out of Boston with offices in London, Los Angeles, the Seattle area. I'm actually located here in Seattle on the Microsoft campus where I'm talking to you from today, and then also down in Sydney. And Ian, over to you.
Thank you very much, Christian. So could you move on to the next slide, please?
Is it not showing your slide?
It's just come through, yeah. I think there's a minute or two, a second or two's delay there, Christian. So, yes, good afternoon again, everyone. My name's Ian Woodgate. I'm the Managing Director of SharePoint Specialist PointBeyond Limited. I founded the company about 5 years ago, now one of the UK's leading SharePoint specialists. Personally, my background is in financial services, where I used to work for Credit Suisse First Boston, and I was intimately involved in online share trading systems. I also organise the SharePoint UK user group meetings at Southampton in the UK, and I regularly speak on at events mainly in the UK, but also from time to time further afield. So I'm actively involved, as you might imagine, in many SharePoint projects across quite a diverse range of industries. My focus these days is very much on SharePoint and broader IT strategy for organisations. A little bit more about my company, PointBeyond. Our focus is very much on helping people to define their SharePoint strategy and get maximum business benefit from SharePoint, because SharePoint is very much a blank canvas, right? And how do you use it really determines whether or not it's a success for your organisation. And we also focus on using SharePoint as a platform for delivering business solutions. So I'd say we help people to get more from their investment in SharePoint by helping to use it more effectively, really. And for example, that might be through forms, workflows, process automation. I'm also a great advocate of the no-code approach and believe that really as much as possible should be delivered through configuration, not custom code. So we've already worked pretty extensively with SharePoint 2013. Myself and a couple of my guys attended Microsoft Ignite training last year for SharePoint 2013. We did a lot of work with the beta. We've migrated several organisations already onto SharePoint 2013. We've got a couple more projects on the go at the moment. And I think what Christian alluded to earlier was a very good point about you've got to upgrade SharePoint 2013 for the right reasons. If there's no business benefit in upgrading to SharePoint 2013, then it doesn't necessarily make sense to go to it just because it's the latest and greatest technology. So one of the things we do is provide honest advice. Does SharePoint 13 provide business benefit to an organization? Back to you, Christian.
Yep, and I think that's a couple points there it's actually been kind of a difficult position for Microsoft because SharePoint 2010 is a very robust platform. It's very powerful. It works pretty well. And so people are very happy with that platform. And so I get that question a lot of, should I be moving over to it? And so we'll cover, try to answer some of those questions. Certainly I have opinions that are out there. There's other content and articles kind of on that topic of when is the right time to move, but just do it for the right reasons. And then the other thing, it's funny you mentioned the no-code solutions. That's another key. It's not really on our list of planning for the migration, but is to understand what the platform can do and to do as much out of the box as possible. Certainly if you are upgrading to the latest version, you really need to look closely at your custom solutions, your third-party tools, and a lot of any customizations that you did to your previous version to see if they're still relevant. It's not just a move it from one to the other, but to find out now, does the platform do out of the box what you had previously purchased or customized a solution to accomplish?
Absolutely.
So that is something that you need to take into consideration.
Especially if we're coming from 2007, in my experience, I would say, and we've several customers who have moved from SharePoint 2007 and been able to replace customizations with out-of-the-box functionality in both 2010 and 2013.
Exactly. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to share some data here, so the role of SharePoint in your organization. And one thing I will say that all this data is based off of a survey that Acceler did over the course of last year. We had over 1,000 companies globally participate in this series of surveys. There's some great data, and there's a link at the end of the presentation where you can go get the full results. There's a white paper that we pulled together, and I provided some analysis of these data points. But just want to give you perspective of what's happened with SharePoint. Here's the interesting. So how does your organization view Microsoft SharePoint? What the shift has been over the course of the last 3 versions of SharePoint, where it was viewed as a team-centric, like a document management solution or as a portal solution, where you see the shift is happening, where SharePoint is now viewed as this complete collaboration framework. It is the launching point from which many organizations are beginning to when you log in, it's the end user environment. It's what they see, how they get to their HR information, to other line of business applications, maybe launch into their CRM system. There's a lot of, it's just very powerful in that it has become that central place where you go to get your work done during the day. And so, you see the shift from 2003 and 7 over to where SharePoint 2010 is evolved at, and what I think we're going to see even more with SharePoint 2013. And okay, the next is how well is SharePoint governance defined. So the plans, the roles, the procedures. As you can see, most organizations have not planned very well. And I always look at answers like this where you have such a large percentage that are neutral. Those people that are not sure how well it's defined, that's usually an indicator that it has not been defined. So think about how you're managing SharePoint. It's a huge impact to the success of the platform overall. Because if you don't have strong governance and a change management model where end users are requesting new features or improvements to the system, and if you don't have a process for prioritizing those things and kind of moving them forward, it really impacts your end user adoption and the acceptance of the platform overall. And so migration is a great opportunity to rethink some of your governance strategies and put some of those plans in place.
I'd also say as well, Christian, that putting it in place in the first place is an awful lot less work than unpicking it afterwards.
Definitely. There's always, planning up front reduces costs in the long term. Always true. And what's interesting about that is that you have a huge majority of organizations that recognize that governance is critical to the ongoing success of SharePoint, and yet you can see the difference here, this gap of only 26% recognize that they have a well-defined governance strategy. And so there's definitely opportunity for organizations to go in and do some work around that. I also want to talk about just briefly about the cloud, the increasing importance of the cloud to customers. And while different regions have different adoption rates, and there are other issues, there's questions that customers have around like the Patriot Act here in the U.S. and things around that. What's undeniable is the fact that software distribution is quickly moving towards the cloud across the board. In fact, I bought a couple new laptops for my kids, for my teenagers, and needed to go and purchase Microsoft Office Suite for them, and I went in and bought the Microsoft Office through the Office 365 program, and basically went and bought the home version of it, which allowed me to do 5 downloads or for 5 PCs, and supported through that model, where I'm paying an annual fee, but will always have the latest version of the software on those 5 PCs. It is a fantastic solution for my family. I've got 4 kids. Unfortunately, with the 5 versions, there's going to be at some point very soon 6 computers minimum in my household. So I'll have to buy another set of licenses for that. But it's a great way to very quickly distribute updates to that software to make sure your customers always have the latest version. Well, a lot of that is driving these things to reduce costs, to reduce the headcount, so the number of people that you have to have out servicing these environments, this ability to do more with less. All great reasons to think about moving towards the cloud, and that's why Microsoft is pushing so hard on Office 365, which is, again, not to say that there are not business reasons for maintaining your SharePoint environment on-prem, but just to ask that question of what can be moved on the cloud, what should be moved on the cloud, where can it save us time and effort, and where does it make sense to keep these pieces on-prem. So for a lot of organizations, one of the things that you need to think about with migration is whether a move to the cloud makes sense or a hybrid scenario makes sense. And Ian, I know that you guys are talking to a lot of customers about Office 365. I don't know how much you get into hybrid scenarios, but I have to imagine that it comes up pretty often.
It comes up a lot, and in fact we're moving into a hybrid situation ourselves, where we're putting most of our content for our own intranet into Office 365, but some of our SharePoint-based applications that we've got, we will continue to run on-premise. The nice thing about the federated authentication, though, is that it's completely seamless for our users. They don't really know that they've from one page to another within SharePoint, as far as they're aware, all SharePoint, but actually they're hopping between an Office 365 hosted instance and an on-premise instance.
And that's key, is having that seamless experience for your end users, but it just means that as part of your architectural overview, and as any new feature request that comes in, you should have that discussion. Does it make sense for this to be on-prem? Does it make sense for it to be in the cloud? You can't just say, well, everything is cheaper, everything is easier in the cloud. May not be the case. And you also need to understand all of your auditing, compliance, and regulatory requirements that may require that you keep some data, some solutions on-prem. So it's just something that you need to think about, talk about. And I don't think I need to go into this into detail, but there's again, there's a lot of, as Microsoft is moving more and more towards this cloud-based model. I think we all understand the benefits of that when it makes business sense to move those workloads into the cloud. So here I'm just going to go through a snapshot of what SharePoint 2013 provides. So one of the things that I absolutely love is the My Task capability. What's great about this is that it allows you, depending on how you work, as me as an individual, I'm a list-driven person. All of my tasks that I do on a daily basis, I'm constantly thinking about what are my my annual commitments that are parsed down to quarterly and monthly activities, and the things that I do on a day-to-day basis, I drive towards those commitments. Well, what's great about this is I can go in, people that are list-driven, go in and add in a series of tasks. I can build kind of simple project plans within SharePoint. This is all out of the box. But what's fantastic about the way that 2013 works is so much of the new features are driven by the new search architecture and the integration of fast search into the platform that previously, in my experience running project management organizations, we spent a lot of time aggregating tasks for individuals. You had to know, okay, there's these 3 project sites that I'm a member of. I need to go between each one of them and look at the various tasks that are being assigned to me. Well, now, because of the search-based architecture and the capability here, if anyone, anywhere in SharePoint assigns a task to me, it automatically aggregates within my tasks view in SharePoint. So it's personalized, it's aggregated, it's very powerful. So you have a lot of this roll-up and aggregation capability. So you have the content query, you still have the content query web part, but now you have this content, content search web part, which utilizes the search capability, and basically the difference between them is a content query web part is limited to the site collection and list data. It's great for aggregating content in real time across multiple lists within a single site collection, whereas your content search web part is, while it's limited to how often you're crawling your data on your system, what's great about it is you can have a content roll-up out of this web part across your entire farm or even multiple farms. Wherever that crawler is reaching, you can pull back those results. So some organizations have had to move from crawling their content nightly to doing something hourly or even more frequently so that they can update a lot of these kinds of features. So again, something that you need to think about with your information architecture and how you're utilizing some of these out-of-the-box features, but it's great that you're able to pull together and really refine the view into this content that's now federated across all of your environments. And I will use again as that example from that project management perspective. I can go create a team site or a project site, and I can pull in a view of, let's say I want to refine it and say any content that's relevant to my project or my product that I'm working on from across multiple farms, but I'm only interested in seeing the Microsoft Office document. So Word docs, Excel files, PowerPoints. I can be very specific about that. In fact, then I can change that query and personalize the view using the refiners and the settings to say I only want to see those Office docs and I only want the content to be relevant to the person who's viewing that web part. So you can be very granular in the result set that you bring back using that.
I think a common one as well, Christian, that I see a lot of is just aggregate my risks and my issues across all my projects.
Exactly. There's a lot of benefit from
time
that.
again.
Yeah, that's fantastic. You also have the activity feed capability. I'm not really going to get into kind of the differences between activity feeds, between what SharePoint out of the box and what Office 365 and Yammer provide. There are some differences there. If we've got a little bit of time maybe, but the idea here is that it's again the experience inside SharePoint 2013 is very personalized. So the activity feeds it really is that Facebook-like experience that so many of our end users are asking for. So the fact that as I mention somebody or push content to somebody, every time I upload content, every time I like something or reply to something, it's showing up in my activity feed. And so you have this ability to follow people, sites, content, so documents, follow a tag, follow specific activities, all of which that allow you to then go in and better interact with people in that content and to add then metadata to that content and those activities. And the way that I like to illustrate this is that if you have two documents that are uploaded into SharePoint at the same time, and they have similar names, they have similar managed metadata that are applied to each one of them. However, if one of them you start interacting with socially, like you share it with people who then start threaded discussions and people are liking it, they're pushing it to other people, they're tagging it with tags and topics that you may have no experience with but are relevant to those individuals. All of that activity, that social activity around that content, increases the value and the findability of that document. And so those two documents that entered equally, but one had all that social interaction, it becomes more searchable, more findable within the environment because of all that rich interaction. So it's the social activities inside SharePoint are about surfacing content. Also, from a project management-centric view, is the projects and deadline capability. It's interesting. I think most people are aware that #1 project management tool out there. Ian, do you know what it is?
Excel.
Excel, right. And people would go in and this is my background. I've worked with portfolio management software platforms and Project Server and kind of other Microsoft competing products out there. And I would always just be amazed that people would resort to using Excel. But because it was easy, those portfolio management systems were so complex in comparison that the common man just could not figure out how to be productive on them. And so what's nice is that the Project Server team and the project team wanted to simplify or baby step people into project management activities. So they've added this very simple way to go in and look at tasks and timelines that are part of the out-of-the-box experience as you add multiple tasks. And this is going back to the first thing I shared, the My Task capability. I just add in a few different tasks. Well, suddenly I can go in and view these tasks that I've entered in, or this project that I'm a member of, and I can look at it within that traditional Gantt view, and I can start modifying the fields, using, so I've got another view of it. No, I must have pulled it out. I can start modifying the start date, the complete date, the predecessors, assigning the task to other individuals, looking at that, project-centric content type, and so you can really start getting into details from that project management view, or keep it very simple. If you're not a project manager but just want to manage lists of tasks, you can do that. What's nice about this is that each time you then log into the platform again, as tasks are being assigned to you, as you're building these timelines for projects, it will automatically notify you, as this example shows. Hey, I've got this schedule that's due in 4 days. Here are these other tasks that are immediately due that I need to go take action on. And then you can also go in and build these portfolio views of all of these activities. So this timeline view for this single task list, you can actually build, stack these timeline views and build a portfolio view. But it's just a quick snapshot view of where we are, what's coming up, all built around that idea of give people more power, a more personalized experience out of the box. You also have the simplified sharing. So wherever you are in SharePoint 2013, the system is constantly asking you, do you want to share it with somebody? And here's who you have shared it with. Do you want to send it out to more people? If you search on content and you do that hover card, that float over where it's giving you a preview into that document or that file or that video, it's telling you, hey, here's some important metadata, here's who you've already shared it with, here's the unique URL back to that item. Do I want to open it? Do I want to share it? Do I want to follow it? All of those actions which would then show up in my activity feed. So if someone were following me and what is Christian working on? Oh, hey, he just uploaded these documents. What are those? Are those relevant to what I'm working on? It's really powerful no matter where you are sharing documents through SkyDrive Pro, and adding more people to it, your ability to just as part of that activity field, use the and mention the person's name. So you start typing their name, it'll try to pre-populate that with people that are authorized within the site. They'll then be notified, so they can, they get an update that, hey, Christian uploaded this document and made a comment that he thinks that it might be relevant to the project that I'm working on. You can then go in and see what that notification is, decide if it's something that you want to interact with, comment on. Again, similarly, I can tag content, and automatically anybody who is determined that, hey, this tag, like in this example, hashtag SharePoint, I want to be notified if anybody is adding content that's relevant to SharePoint. I want to be able to see that through my notifications. So some reasons why companies will move to SharePoint 2013, and Ian, feel free to jump in if you have any other reasons here. But people are asking, well, when is the right time? Why should I be moving to 2013? One of the reasons, and these are not all of the reasons, these are just some of the things, the ways that I explain it to people. We talked about at the beginning, Ian and I talked about doing it for the right reasons, for the business reasons. One reason is that the end user adoption issues that you may have had with a previous version of SharePoint, there are a lot of usability improvements. Just the things that I showed you, all of which were out of the box. It is designed with the end user in mind to keep them more engaged and make them more productive on day one. So if that has become an issue, if people are confused, like, well, look, I know how to upload a document, but that's kind of it. It's designed to try and help end users feel more productive, make it more intuitive out of the box. Which is not to say that there doesn't need to still be some degree of training, because it is different, the way that it looks, the way that it works compared to 2010, enough so that you do want to provide some guidance. But I think very quickly users will find that it's much more compatible with all of the other consumer-based social platforms and other tools that they're accustomed to using in their personal lives. It's much more like that experience now within SharePoint.
Certainly, Christian, in our experience, that's becoming a big driver for SharePoint 2013 is the support for mobile devices.
Oh yeah, that's huge. And that screenshot that I shared about the the project view, how when you log back in, it's telling you which tasks are due and what you need to be thinking about. From a mobile standpoint, it really has that in mind. SharePoint 2013 was designed with the idea that people are going to be accessing SharePoint via their browser on their PC, as well as on tablets and on mobile devices. So it can be designed, and there's a feature set called a Design Manager that utilizes the publishing pages. So if you do have end users that are primarily accessing SharePoint through other devices, you can actually design a construct for those devices so that when you publish content, like your project updates, you don't want to make the smartphone version of SharePoint just a smaller screen version of your primary SharePoint environment. No, you might want to go in there and minimize the web parts and the components of a site that they see, giving them the most relevant information for the mobile experience. So you design this construct, or this master page, specifically for the smartphone, specifically for the tablet, and then publish. When you publish out, the system knows this user is accessing SharePoint via this device and automatically will format it. And it's more than just responsive design. It's looking at the next step beyond that and customizing that experience for those devices. Another reason is social has become a company strategy. And I am definitely on the bandwagon for social collaboration. It's something that I've worked in and talked about and written about for more than a decade now. In fact, I wrote a white paper back in early 2004 where I was chastising Microsoft for being slow to adopt social technologies. That was in 2004. But for a lot of organizations that are really thinking about social, it's becoming very mainstream and is becoming part of company cultures to think about social. SharePoint 2013 is definitely more social and is caught up very quickly to competitors in that space. As I mentioned, if you're publishing to multiple formats, in there, I kind of joined them, but publishing to multiple formats, we have people that are remote and accessing that. SharePoint 2013 is designed for that in mind. And also, I didn't really get into the feature set, but the improvements to search with the integration of FAST, so many of the features inside SharePoint 2013 are based around the new search architecture, which right there simplifies and improves, it makes so much more powerful all of the business intelligence and reporting capability that you can do. And as Ian said, from a federated experience as well, massive improvements to SharePoint's capability to pull data from wherever it exists and aggregate that, federate that within SharePoint. Because the end user doesn't care where that data is. They don't need to know the details of, well, we're keeping this data set on-prem because of these compliance regulatory reasons. They just want access to the data. They don't necessarily care that certain aspects of it are being hosted in the cloud, maybe on Office 365, maybe with a private hoster. Other aspects are sitting in a server back in the in the back that the IT team owns. Doesn't matter to them. They just want to get access to that data. And so SharePoint 2013 is set up much more for that experience.
Perhaps also on this slide, it would be worth mentioning as well, Christian, is the performance improvements in 2013. We've got quite a lot of customers with pretty large SharePoint environments, pretty large farms, and also distributed globally where the bandwidth requirements of SharePoint and the responsiveness of the UI, Microsoft has done a lot of work. And we're finding figures like, there's a 40% reduction in bandwidth utilization between 2013 and 2010, and that's if you've got people at the end of a long piece of wire, that's a significant improvement.
Oh, definitely, and to tack one thing on the end of that is also, if you're using SharePoint for an extranet or a public-facing website, it is the design. There are improvements, dramatic improvements there.
Absolutely.
To simplify the management of that, to streamline that for SEO optimization and kind of all of those aspects as well. Yeah, where SharePoint 2010 focused on enterprise content management capability, SharePoint 2013 went beyond that, added some additional features, but it was more about web content management. So a lot of improvements there. So why migrate? So some of the things that we've talked about, why are we talking about migration now? Maybe you're upgrading to a newer version. Maybe you're going through a hardware refresh, and you're also maybe considering the cloud. Maybe you're thinking about this as you were already going to go in there and restructure, roll out new governance strategies, re-architect your information architecture, kind of rebuild. And so it makes sense. Why do we do all this on the older version? We might as well make these improvements and move to the latest version. All valid reasons to be thinking about migration. As what I alluded to at the beginning, and like to illustrate it this way, is that most people think about migration this way. Hey, just need to move some content. We've got a few solutions. The reality is that this is what your migration looks like. There's so much that's below the surface. And that's really kind of the point of what we're talking about today, is the bulk of the activity that is the reality of migration is about that planning activity. Migrations are like an onion. There are layers to that. I always kind of joke, like, why is a migration like an onion? It's like, well, it stinks. There are layers to it, and somebody pointed out it also occasionally makes you cry. So one of the things I like to say right up front define your business priorities. Understand the differences between your wants and needs and prioritize those things. So you need to think about, what are you trying to accomplish with SharePoint? It's not about, I like to, when I present, ask that question out to an audience. What is the goal? What are you trying to achieve? It says, well, we're trying to upgrade to the new version. Like, no, that is not your business reason for doing a migration. You are employing the use of SharePoint to do something, to improve process, to speed up the rate at which you do what it is that you do for your business. It's an enabling technology. Understand what you're trying to accomplish with SharePoint. So you might have strategic initiatives. You might then talk about things that are on-prem versus hosted, online and offline, the mobile experiences, your extranet, line-to-business app integration, all these different things, extension of social platforms. All these different things are all valid reasons for doing it. So understand, I always like to say that migration, it begins with a business analyst activity. Going through and understanding what is the business trying to accomplish, and then mapping what we're trying to accomplish with what the technology can do. You want to engage with the business users. Talk to them about what they're trying to accomplish. Again, don't get into solution building until you fully understand what are the problems that we're trying to solve, where SharePoint may or may not be the only technology that you employ. Figure out who the key change leaders are, the stakeholders of the organization, get their buy-in to what you're trying to solve for the business. And I always like to tell people up front, part of planning is build a communication plan. People get stressed out if they feel that they don't have visibility into all the change that's happening. If you start by over-communicating, let people know that there's no change to the status, but do that on a regular basis. Be consistent. Have that communication plan in place. And then integrate your change management and project management capabilities. This is so critical. When people feel that they have a voice, when they feel like they're able to share their requirements, their complaints, and that somebody is listening and it's been prioritized, it's being considered, then they are more likely to stay engaged and accept the end result of that process. So there's a lot of models for communication plans that are out there. However you go in there and do that, I like being very clear on the types of communications that are out, how regular they'll come out. People then kind of forget about those things when they have confidence that things are being done and that status is being given on consistently. They just want to feel comfortable that they know if they have an issue, if they have a question, that somebody is listening and taking it into consideration. The next step is rebuilding your taxonomy, thinking about how you are utilizing your metadata, because metadata is the foundation to any knowledge management platform. You need to set realistic priorities about what it takes to build and to use those things. You're never going to have a perfect taxonomy on day one. A taxonomy is an evolutionary activity. It's something that you need to care and take care of and feed regularly and make it part of your governance strategy. And you need to think about where ownership is of your taxonomies across your environment. What can be centralized, what needs to be managed and owned at the local level. You're not going to solve every issue. I always tell people, like, draw a line in the sand, say, here's where we're starting from. Do your best, but just realize that you'll launch, you'll migrate, you'll apply your new taxonomy to new content and realize, we needed to make these changes we missed. That is going to happen every time. You can't do the best planning. You're going to miss some things, or you're going to learn from usage what changes that you need to make. So design for the things that matter, for the prioritized business activities, and then apply that and learn from it, make it iterative going forward. So best practices, leverage what you've already built. most organizations have some kind of taxonomy, whether they've gone and built one out, a structured environment, or they're just, the real world scenarios. There's the reality of how people are using the system. Learn from that and build from that. Talk to your end users about what's working, what's not. Don't do your information architecture and taxonomy planning in a vacuum. Don't be a small committee sitting behind a closed door, but get your end users involved, because at the end of the day, it's their content. They know how it's being used. They know that whether they're able to or not able to find their content based on that taxonomy.
Highly recommend class sorting exercises there as well. In our experience, that can really help for end users to
understand. And that's key to governance. And I'm sure Ian, PointBeyond spends a lot of time talking with customers about how to best implement this and to actually run this aspect of it, because information architecture is a living, breathing activity.
Absolutely.
So map, now you've defined your taxonomy, the structure, you've defined what your rules are that you need to meet, so map now to your information architecture. So just realize that a re-architecture, to go in and rebuild, that activity for time and impact to end users and to the management team could exceed the size of the actual migration activity. But you need to do this. You need to be thinking about this. This is part of what Ian said. If you do this work up front, your system on the back end, once you've implemented it, will run more smoothly, less support costs, less impact later when changes occur. I always like to tell people to build out your content maps. I like to visually map out, where are my templates, where are my content types, what does my information architecture look like drawn out, how are we managing that, where can we consolidate, have all those discussions up front, communicate the plan out, and move forward. So you need to understand what content is out there and what you're going to do with it. So whether it's through file shares, older SharePoint versions, it's amazing the vast majority of organizations are maintaining multiple versions of SharePoint. We don't see SharePoint 2001 so much, but we see a lot of customers that have 2000, well, not that many 2003 anymore, but a lot of 2007, certainly 2010, and now 2013, and Office 365 environments, all with valid business reasons for existing. Just understand what's still going to live, what needs to be consolidated or migrated. You may be working with other ECM platforms. You may have other business processes and tools that need to be brought in as well. You need to then go in and do an overall health check, like how are our permissions looking? How is our reporting? What are our auditing processes? All of those things are part of that migration planning activity. So look at usage and activity permissions, storage, kind of an important issue. Your auditing, your performance of the system, all those things taken into consideration. What kind of custom?
Yep. So as well, Christian, a major consideration is implementing your managed metadata, especially a lot of people going from 7 to 10, 7 to 13, because retrofitting metadata to existing content, it may not even be worth the effort, and very much depends on your scenario, but that can be a very significant undertaking in my experience.
Right. That's one of those things where if you don't have the information gathered, if you don't understand what's happening on your system, then you can't make a decision of whether that's a priority and whether the value outweighs the cost of doing those things. If you're not looking at that level of detail, just the surface of that iceberg, you're going to miss then, what could potentially happen. You might go down that path of moving all that, mapping that metadata without there being real value there. Now here I'm just going to go through very quickly, but the customizations on your source system, understand what's out there. As I said earlier, some of these things may be out of the box now in SharePoint. You don't need to have these customizations. So just understand what's out there, who's using them, why they're using them, the business value of those things. If out of the box only provides 60, 70, 80% of the functionality that you need, is that good enough? And then are those changes outside of the SharePoint framework? Future upgrades. You want to simplify this and stay as close to the out-of-the-box experience as possible. Best practices, plan this to do your migration in waves. So depending on the size of your environment, you may not want to move everybody all at once, but test out migrations with, by team, by business unit, by web app. Clearly define the roles and responsibilities and how people are involved, and communicate what level of effort it's going to take and the level of involvement of people to participate in that process. Establish clear and simple governance guidelines. Why are you doing governance at all? What is the value there? It's about mitigating the risks of managing SharePoint ongoing. So managing your intellectual property, the auditing, compliance, the data integrity, the change management, all of those things. It's about understanding the needs of your end users through education and training. So some best practices. Again, clearly define the roles and responsibilities. What is being owned by centralized IT versus what's being owned by business units, by power users, by your typical business user, end user. Who are your stakeholders? Where is their level of responsibility and ownership? I always like to tell people, outline the short-term ongoing processes and then your long-term goals for simplifying that. Governance, there's always more work up front while you're trying to figure out what is the rhythm, the cadence of management of these different activities. It does decrease over time as people, again, build up confidence in those activities. They know that when they have a change to the taxonomy, who do they go to? How is it documented? How is it implemented in the system? We need a new feature. We need a new third-party tool. What is the process for it to be reviewed, approved, implemented, and give them visibility into that process and the prioritization of their requests, and people are more likely to participate. I always like to say have a written plan. Doesn't mean in paper. Nobody likes the binder that you sit up on the shelf, but have a site, a governance site where you go through and have documented your information management, information architecture, any service level agreements, your change management process, and then all the detail on the hard and fast rules around which you must work. If you have, again, depending on your industry, the regulatory requirements, have those things documented so people understand. And then make sure that your governance strategy is mapped to the business value to be delivered. So you don't want to have a heavy-handed governance strategy where people are using SharePoint just for lightweight document collaboration. Try to keep it. I always am a big believer in as little governance as needed, just the bare minimum. Microsoft is now using the minimal viable product MVP model. I'm a big believer in that for governance as well. And the last one is implement transparent change management. I've talked about that throughout, but talk about why the migration is needed. Identify user resistance, where people are having issues. It could indicate that there's a higher prioritization than you had earlier thought based on what people are doing. There are some organizations that just rely on SharePoint more heavily than others. You may want to reprioritize based on that user resistance. Provide tools and time to help them through the migration, and replicate technical leadership traits in the new process. So things that you're good at, you definitely want to lean on those things. Decide where and when to involve your end users. Get them involved in creating the use cases and the documentation, and then prioritizing what things need to come out first. Help them understand business priority, but keep them as part of the dialogue around that prioritization. And then they know their content, so let them drive and be responsible for a lot of what happens with their own content in their sites. So some best practices there. And again, I'm going through some of these very quickly so we can get through the content. All this is available out on SlideShare. We'll provide the links later. But make it clear how people are involved, what's expected. Give them the opportunity to provide feedback. At Microsoft, I ran a steering committee where SharePoint was a huge aspect of that, and people knew, we'd advertised, here's where this steering committee meets, what time, and every meeting we had different people coming through sharing concerns about things that they wanted to see, and we gave them that stage for feedback, and then instantly it went into our project planning and the reporting that we provided about what changes were happening in the environment, and people really appreciated that. Show them what actions you're taking, when you think it'll be delivered, and then just do all that you can to mentor, educate, and communicate. I love this quote here, but the more that you involve people in the process, the more likely they are to accept the results. It's certainly true with SharePoint migrations. So in summary, know what's out there, understand how people are using the system, how the system is providing value and where it needs to improve, and then know the guiding principles, so those compliance, auditing, regulatory requirements about how the system needs to be used and managed, and then create governance policies that follow those principles but allow people to collaborate. Don't burden people with governance as part of your planning, but as you're preparing to migrate, simplify as much as possible. Planning is really the key. I always tell people, use your established project management methodology. People know it, they're familiar with it. It has, most of them, depending on how robust methodology it is, have pretty well-defined inputs and outputs for your project, for project management in general. People are familiar with that. But follow these universal steps. So understanding your business objectives, understand, document your end-user expectations, understand the governance model, take in that feedback and iterate on that design as you migrate out. And always make your efforts transparent. So Ian, I know you had a few more things that you wanted to cover.
Absolutely, Christian. I was just going to talk through very quickly some of the perils and pitfalls of migration that we come across in our experience. You able to move on to the next slide, please?
Yeah. Come on there. Is it showing up? Does it say perils and pitfalls?
Perils and pitfalls. Well, do you want to cover off these last few slides, and I should?
Yeah, I think if you're not seeing them quick enough, but perils and pitfalls of migration. So
here we go. Yeah, I think it's just taking a few seconds for my screen to catch up. Christian, I'm aware that there's quite an echo for some people attending when I'm speaking, so I don't know if you mind just muting while I talk for a second, please.
Sure.
So thank you very much for that, Christian. I'm conscious of time. I was just going to talk very briefly about some of the things which, if you don't really counter correctly, can derail the migration project. I've got quite a long list here, so I'm just going to highlight a few. The first one is customizations, which we've talked a little bit about already. These can complicate a migration considerably in that they need to be very carefully assessed and checked out. In particular, we sometimes find that customizations in an old version of SharePoint can cause problems in 2013, and in fact it's perfectly feasible to replace them with out-of-the-box functionality in your new version. So A, don't assume that all of your customizations will port without any problems, and B, don't assume that you need to port all of your customizations. You may be able to get rid of them altogether. So they all need to be assessed, and you need to look carefully at the options that are available. Another item to talk about is test migrations. So really don't assume everything will work first time. You definitely need to do test migrations and to validate them. And that's one of the reasons I like using Control Point Migrator, is it gives the flexibility for us to be able to run and rerun migrations and to tweak the migration process until we're completely happy with the result. Next one I will touch upon is content reorganization. As Christian has already said, this can be a bigger piece of work than the actual migration itself, and that certainly is our experience. It needs very careful planning and a considered approach. I'll also mention here best practice installation of SharePoint 2013. So a production on-premise 2013 environment is a very complex system. It's a lot more than 10 or 7. There are a lot of moving parts. If you don't plan it properly and design it properly and follow best practice, then really actually all you're doing is building in problems that will come back and bite you later, pretty much guaranteed. So the wizard-driven next approach that I see so many times just will not cut it for SharePoint 2013. It's not at all like installing Office on a PC. I just can't emphasize that point enough. You need to plan your deployment very carefully and to know exactly what you are doing. The last item I mentioned here is cloud, and I know we've talked a little about Office 365 already. I just wanted to say really that if you've not considered SharePoint Online, then you really should. It's not right for everyone, of course. There are very good reasons why not everyone can use it, but it does have the potential to take a lot of the headaches away and to reduce costs considerably. So I would kind of urge people not just to dismiss it because you've heard a scare story in the past or you've not used cloud services previously. Okay, next slide please, Christian.
Yeah, it's on the next slide.
No worries, it's just taking about 20 seconds to come through. So to finish off, I'm just going to talk about a fairly simple, effective way that PointBeyond can help with migration planning. Because what we've really found in the work that we've done to date is there are 3 questions that everyone really wants to answer. The first one is, should we upgrade to 2013 at all? And if so, what benefits will it bring us? The second one is, how should we go about actually doing our migration? And the third question that needs to be answered is, how much will it likely cost to achieve it? So what we've done is we've packaged this up into a fixed price, 4-day piece of work, leverages both our experience and expertise, but also includes use of the Excel tools for analysis purposes. And what I would say is, remember that this is planning that needs to be done anyway as part of a migration. So by being upfront about it, packaging it in this way, what we've been able to do for several customers now is actually to accelerate and de-risk their migration and actually save them money in the longer term by ensuring that they go down the right path to their migration. So if anyone would like any more information on this or for any more general migration assistance, please do feel free to contact me. We've also got a very nice microsite up at www.sharepoint2013upgrade.co.uk. So I'm conscious of time. That just about leaves it for me to wrap up and to say thank you very much to Christian for a most interesting webinar. Some very good points raised and a lot to think about. We will leave our contact details up on the screen. We have got a couple of questions which we will go through now. I'd also like to thank everyone